Greetings all. It is January 28th, 2023. As I've said many times, I listen to and read a lot of commentary and analysis about what is happening in the world and why. But I increasingly find myself getting very frustrated because there are underlying assumptions that are unspoken and unquestioned, and the whole premise is based on the belief that this current paradigm is inherently valid, worth preserving, and not defunct, which from my perspective it clearly is. If something is defunct, by definition, it's irreparable. It's so broken or so old and worn out that it has to be thrown out, or you have to start over, rebuild something from scratch. So a lot of the discussion and analysis that is going on about issues of concern these days has this flawed premise. And I don't think that's intentional. I think people simply haven't realized yet that the solution to our problems doesn't come from the past, but comes from the future. In other words, we need to look at our situation from an entirely different perspective. And I have put forward some of that kind of thinking in my most recent episodes. Not that I necessarily have all of the solutions to the world's major problems personally, but more like a thought experiment, or to get people to start to question some of these underlying assumptions and think differently. In essence, we are being called upon to make a paradigm shift collectively. And it may begin with some people and then expand over time. It's not likely to occur on a mass scale all at once. It'll be a transition. Having said that, I do expect that we will, at some point, if we have not already, reach a critical mass, which will be a very significant milestone. But that's a whole other topic. Now, there's another fascinating link or piece to the puzzle. Recently, I published an episode about Pluto at 29 degrees of Capricorn and about to shift into Aquarius. And there's a very clear relationship to what I'm talking about now, because Pluto is all about death and rebirth. Under hard Pluto transits, people tend to have experiences that can sometimes be very difficult and challenging to their psyche, because a part of them literally needs to die in order for a new part of them to be born. That is why people talk about death and rebirth when they talk about Pluto. Of course, people are usually talking about a metaphorical death. If someone was to go through a paradigm shift, there's a very high probability that a Pluto transit would be involved. So now we have Pluto moving from Capricorn into Aquarius. And the modern ruler of Aquarius is Uranus. Uranus is all about sudden and dramatic change and revolution. And Aquarius rules the 11th house. The 11th house governs society at large. Not so much your village, but the collective. So we have this revolutionary energy coupled with the death and rebirth energy of Pluto, which very well could bring about the kind of paradigm shift I am suggesting we need. So as we go through this transit of Pluto through Aquarius, we may very well look back and shake our heads when we consider the worldview and perspective that people had prior to then. Because our perspective will have changed dramatically, deeply, and fundamentally. The challenging components of this transition will be the dying parts, the dying paradigms, the dying beliefs, the dying ways of doing things and ways of being, and those who are in resistance to that will struggle. There are certain groups that literally deny evolution. But those who are open-minded and accepting of change and not tied up with dogma are going to find this period absolutely exciting, stimulating, and fascinating. And that applies not just to people, but to situations, circumstances, institutions, corporations, government, all aspects of human experience and reality and affairs. And especially because Aquarius governs society, we're going to see a lot of that happening in that sphere. Being in resistance to a significant Pluto transit can be hell. So don't be one of those people. Your options are death or rebirth. Which side would you want to be on? Pluto is very black and white, so choose wisely. You may have noticed that I have been rather prolific for about a week, and I want to take this opportunity to explain what's been going on. At the beginning of this episode, I described my frustration as I was reading material or listening to material about current affairs. And I've been experiencing that for quite some time, like months, really. And then as I reflected on my frustration and what the root of it was, I started to become aware of what I've been describing lately, that we are stuck in a paradigm and that we're simultaneously on the verge of making a major shift. And as I reflect on that now, I have the very strong impression that that shift is actually happening. I have been talking about these kinds of things for over a year here on my channel, but that was more theoretical. The good news is that I can state with a fair degree of confidence that the shift is actually underway, and that as we go further into this, reality may shift to the point where we find we no longer have to discuss what is wrong with the world or the things that are holding us back, which has really dominated our discussions, meaning we may not have to focus on those things as much, relatively speaking, as we do now. But instead, we will shift the conversation to what does this new world look like? And how does it work? We will have left the destructive phase or the death cycle of paradigms that I've been talking about, and we will have entered the creative phase or the rebirth phase, which will be, I'm getting strong energy here saying this, which will be much more pleasant and interesting in a positive way, instead of interesting in a negative way. That, to me, is extremely exciting. There will be things that just leave our consciousness. They will not be demanding nearly as much of our energy and attention. And we will begin to enter the phase of creation. So I want to leave you with more of a positive note, and what you've been witnessing recently with me and what I've been expressing here in my episodes has been my journey to this conclusion. I am also assuming that the listener understands what I mean when I use the term paradigm shift. A paradigm shift results in a completely new reality with new rules. Thus, what is possible in one paradigm is not necessarily possible in the other, and the past is not necessarily a prologue for the future. I have tried to define paradigm shifts in past episodes. We cannot necessarily extrapolate from the past and project it onto the future in that case. For example, if next week humanity had interaction with an intelligent alien species and everyone knew it, it would be a groundbreaking experience because it would shift everything we think and understand about reality. And everything from that point forward would be different than it was prior to then. It would cause us to fundamentally rethink everything. In my opinion, that is actually likely to occur at some point, but I'm just using that as an example about how reality can shift dramatically and suddenly everything is changed. In that event, people would be talking about that for years. Somebody in 1950, although they could speculate about it or fantasize about it, it's not the same thing as actually being there when it happens and going through that experience. That is a very superficial example, but I'm trying to make the case about how big and important paradigm shifts actually are. Paradigm shifts are not regular occurrences. They are very rare, and a person may never experience one in a lifetime. It's certainly something that doesn't happen every week or every year or every decade even necessarily. Again, search my channel for the word paradigm. Now, there's one other important thing I need to layer in here, which is that I've been focusing a lot on this imminent shift of Pluto moving into Aquarius, but there's a bigger picture, which is the actual age of Aquarius itself. And we are also in that transition. A 2200-year age of Pisces is drawing to a close. And so when you consider what I'm discussing, please take into account that there is a bigger cycle involved as well, an extremely rare cycle. And I have talked about that in various ways in prior episodes. And as I have stated before, I believe that Pluto transiting Aquarius and that the last great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, which occurred at the very beginning of Aquarius, literally at 0 degrees of Aquarius on December 21st of 2020. You can't make this up. What are the odds? And there are many other expressions too numerous to mention here right now. I think those are important hallmarks and trigger points for this Age of Aquarius transition. So a lot of the concepts I'm talking about, including this major paradigm shift, relate to that as well. So please bear that in mind. Thanks for joining me. Take care. Thanks for all your comments, feedback, and support, and I'll talk to you again soon.